Welcome to Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan, and we are broadcasting live on January 21st from the studios of WMNF in Tampa. Today, we have a special show featuring music and news, as well as arts events in our community. Later on in the show, we're going to hear from May Pang, the lost weekend girlfriend of John Lennon. She'll be exhibiting her photos of John in Ybor City starting this Friday at Tempest Projects. We'll hear more about that later in the show. But first up this hour, we're going to talk about some music-related happenings in Sarasota's Selby Gardens. Our guests are Jennifer Romanecki, the president and CEO of Marie Selby Botanical Gardens in Sarasota, and Dr. David Barry, their chief museum curator. Welcome to Tuesday Cafe, Jennifer and David.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks very much.
I'm really glad you could join us. Thanks so much. So before we tell the music fans here in our audience about the special exhibits and performances that are coming up at Selby, let's just go get a little bit of background. How would you describe Selby Gardens to somebody who hasn't visited yet?
Well, Selby Gardens consists of, it's one organization with two campuses, the downtown Sarasota campus and the historic Spanish Point campus 10 miles south. And basically, we provide incredible bayfront sanctuaries that connect people to air plants of the world, native nature, and our regional history. So we're lucky to steward 45 bayfront acres in the heart of Sarasota.
And one of those campuses is right in the city, right in downtown Sarasota.
That's right. So our downtown Sarasota campus is right in the heart of the city, yet it really is an urban oasis and provides respite and refuge and an escape for all, for sure.
And Jennifer, you mentioned something about air plants. So what is Selby's claim to fame? I guess it would be when it comes to things like bromeliads, and describe that for people who don't know what that is.
Yeah, so Selby Gardens is the only botanical garden in the world that focuses on the study of epiphytes, or air plants that grow in the tree canopy instead of the soil, like orchids and bromeliads. We are actually world renowned for having the best scientifically documented collections of orchids and bromeliads anywhere. So that really is our claim to fame and what we are known internationally for.
And one more thing I want to get to before we get to the music section of the interview is that in reading about Selby Gardens, I read that it was established by forward-thinking women of their time. What do you mean by that?
Great question. So we have iconic women in the history of Selby Gardens. So we have Marie Selby at the downtown Sarasota campus, and it was actually her fateful decision to leave the campus to be a botanical garden for the public to enjoy as a bequest in 1971. And her husband's wealth came from the oil industry, but her husband passed away much earlier than she did, and it was her decision to found this botanical garden. At the historic Spanish Point campus, the property is the former home of Bertha Palmer, who, is certainly iconic in our region for not only sort of making our region what it is from a real estate standpoint, but also for being a groundbreaking woman in cattle ranching, in art collecting, all kinds of leadership Bertha Palmer has shown. So it's wonderful to have these two iconic women as the background of the founding of both campuses.
So keeping with the music theme of today's show, and more specifically the Beatles, you have an exhibition that opens on February 9th. It's called George Harrison, A Gardener's Life. It's part of a series that examines the work of major artists through the lens of their connection to nature. So what was George Harrison's connection to nature?
Well, that's a great question. So basically, with this series, we've been trying to look at major artists, as you said, through the lens of their connection to nature, but really trying to uncover surprising connections. And of course, many people know George Harrison as the lead guitarist of the Beatles, of course, iconic rock band. But many people don't realize that at the age of 27, when the Beatles broke up, George Harrison purchased a derelict Victorian estate outside of London, 32 acres of it, and then spent the whole rest of his life personally gardening it, restoring it, and also recording his solo music career with a recording studio on the property. So this is really a surprising story for many people. And, you know, George Harrison was often quoted as saying, "I'm just a gardener," after the Beatles. And his autobiography, I Mean Mine, he dedicated to gardeners everywhere. David, would you like to chime in on further on that?
Jennifer, I think you covered the basics. One of the things that our show will do is not only look at George and his revitalization of the property, but the history of the property itself, which goes back to the end of the 19th century and involves a rather colorful character by the name of Frank Crisp. And I think George saw a kind of kinship with Crisp. And ultimately, Crisp is the source of inspiration for Let It Roll, or the Ballad of Frankie Crisp, which is one of the great songs from All Things Must Pass.
And one specific thing about the way that George gardened, I guess, according to what I've been reading, is that he had a dedication to humor in gardening and spontaneity and whimsy. Tell us more about that and how that plays into the exhibition at Selby.
It's definitely part of George's contribution, and I think it was an extension of his sort of playful character. But I think that's another area of overlap where he sees a connection with Crisp. Frank Crisp was a very prominent lawyer in Victorian Britain, very successful. He dabbled in a number of different scientific disciplines. He was a great collector of microscopes and had an interest in microscopy, was also involved in horticulture. He was briefly president of the Royal Horticultural Society, but he had a great sense of humor. And one of his many horticultural interests was gardening and really garden history. So he produces a history of medieval gardens. And when he lays out Friar Park, which is the estate that ultimately George purchases and brings back to life, he does so by populating the grounds with different garden types that have a history going back to the Middle Ages. And to give you an example, one of the things we're featuring in the show is a map that Crisp commissions, a plan of the gardens from 1914. He commissions an illustrator named Alan Tabor, and the map is annotated, all the little fun features. It's sort of like a Where's Waldo-like situation, where you have little garden critters roaming around in the woods, and everything is named ye this or ye that. He's definitely playing up on the kind of medieval history, but they're really fun and humorous turns of phrase. And George, I think, taps into that. He references whole sections of the map in some of his songs. Some of the lyrics, for example, in Let It Roll, are taken directly from descriptors on the plan. So I think there's a kinship there. But one of the great things with George and Olivia Harrison's contributions to the history of this estate was they didn't limit themselves to faithful historical reconstruction. They were very, very mindful of and sympathetic to the history and really celebrated that history and cherished that history, but they did it in their own way. Which I think is spot on, because I think had the roles been reversed, I think that's probably how Crisp would have done it as well.
Our guests are David Barry, the Chief Museum Curator at Mary Selby Botanical Gardens in Sarasota, and Jennifer Romanecki, the President and CEO of Selby Gardens. And we're talking about exhibitions there that are relating to music. This is Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan, and we're broadcasting from WMNF. So you were referring to the kind of the original designs of Friar Park, this estate that George Harrison bought after he left the Beatles, after the Beatles disbanded, and how it was set up when it was first created. But then when George got it, it was kind of in disrepair, and he had to go through and re-garden everything. It seems. Was he faithful to the original designs, or did he put his own little spin on it?
Um, he builds on the existing blueprint, I guess would be the way to describe it. There are some major garden features that are quite sizable because the property that George purchases is about 32 acres. And to give you an example, Crisp built in the 1890s this extraordinary alpine garden, and the garden itself is 4 acres. And at the top of it is a kind of a scale model of the Matterhorn in the Alps. And it's this extraordinary, almost earthwork that was populated with all these different plants. So certainly that was still standing, and it was something that George had to reckon with as a physical feature of the property. He, I think, was very interested in the history and in kind of rediscovering what had been created there. But when it came to the replanting of that garden, it wasn't necessarily, he wasn't limiting himself to just the plants that Crisp had used. There's a reflection of George and Olivia's tastes, and just, I think, general changes in gardening fashion. But it's working with the bones, with the framework that was there, and being deeply, deeply respectful of that. And you see it there's a topiary garden, the cultivation of a lake that's sort of at the bottom of the property. All the major elements that Crisp lays out that are the kind of defining points of the property have been preserved and have been, greatly loved and cared for. But the plantings are all a little bit different, reflecting the tastes of the gardeners and the changing of the times.
So if people go to Selby Garden beginning February 9th and see this George Harrison, A Gardener's Life exhibition, how do you translate what you've been telling us about George's love of gardening? What will that look like at Selby Gardens?
Jennifer, you want to take that?
Sure. So really what we have pioneered here at Selby Gardens is a truly interdisciplinary experience. So these exhibits that we feature at this time of the year incorporate art, imagery, ephemera, as well as horticultural installation, music. We really want you to use all of your senses. So when visitors arrive at Selby Gardens, they will encounter a number of garden vignettes that connect to George Harrison's vision for Friar Park and evoke different elements of Friar Park and George himself, as well as his music. So there will be different horticultural experiences in the gardens as well as inside the conservatory, and then different albums from George Harrison's really iconic solo career will punctuate different elements of the gardens experience. The visitor will hear All Things Must Pass, A Living in the Material World, Dark Horse. So it'll be a very much interdisciplinary experience between immersing in the horticultural garden vignettes, hearing the music, and then also being able to encounter excerpts of Olivia Harrison's poetry with her book, Came the Lightning, of 20 poems she dedicated to George Harrison on the anniversary of his passing. So it's a very cross-discipline experience. And then finally, you'll arrive at the museum building where you will not only encounter images of George Harrison in his gardens that really have never been seen by the public before, whether it's him actually at the beginning, in the estate, when it's not in good shape and when he's embarking on fixing it, to the way the gardens look now, as well as to historic imagery and rare books and material connecting to the iconic Friar Park of the Victorian era. So we thought it was a wonderful coincidence that we had some of this rare books material in our own collection, because Selby Gardens has rare books and prints dating to the 1600s in our library. And so we were really excited to find some synergies with our own collection. So it really will be an exhibit of multiple disciplines using all of your senses. And at the same time, it's an exhibit about discovery, because most people don't know this side of George Harrison. And so I think it'll be very engaging, fun, and also educational for sure.
And speaking of Olivia Harrison, she'll actually be there giving a lecture, one luncheon on February 11th. Now, you can't mention any prices, but what will Olivia Harrison speak about then?
So this is great. You know, we have been collaborating with Olivia Harrison and the estate on this project. And so she is coming in to really be our keynote lecturer in conversation with Robin Lane Fox, a world-renowned gardener, historian, and scholar. And basically, it's a great way to kick off the exhibit. Not sure how many tickets are left, but if you go to selby.org, there might be a few left, although it's selling out quickly. And I think, you know, she will share her perspective, not only on George and Friar Park, but also what went into her writing her poems dedicated to George. In this book, Came the Lightning, and she will also sign copies of her book at the event. And then the next day on February 12th, we will have an evening dedicated to George Harrison with Patti Smith, Selby Gardens' iconic artist in residence, who will be doing a 1-hour performance connecting to George Harrison through her own lens. And so it's a real double whammy to launch the exhibit. You know, and we're really excited about the momentum and energy that will bring to the first week of the exhibit.
And on the subject of Patti Smith, her exhibit is still on display through August 31st. It's called Patti Smith, A Book of Days, and that's at the historic Spanish Point campus. What can people see there?
So this is a wonderful, so Patti Smith, we've been collaborating with for several years now, and it's really an incredible partnership that we have. And so on view at the historic Spanish Point campus are photographs that Patti Smith took herself that are featured in her book, A Book of Days, which is based on her Instagram account. You know, it's sort of, the book is a slice of her life on and off the road. And throughout her life, you know, she has really been influenced by nature. And so the exhibit really highlights photographs she took herself that resonate within nature, which is one of her key inspirations. And it's great to see her photographs outdoors set in the natural landscape. So they're blown up on aluminum and sited in the natural landscape, which makes for a really interesting and dynamic presentation of her works.
What's the history of the connection of Patti Smith to Selby Gardens, and why do you think that it's been a good match?
Well, our relationship with Patti started with this interdisciplinary exhibition series when we featured her in dialogue with Robert Mapplethorpe's photographs of flowers. And we did that exhibit in 2022. And it was again along the same vein as this George Harrison exhibit, multidisciplinary, featuring music, lyrics, poetry, and then of course Robert's photography, because the two of them really have a very storied relationship that was featured in her book Just Kids. And so that exhibit, I thought, well, let's see if we can get Patti Smith here. And, we connected with her, invited her to perform, and, we just hit it off. So I thought, well, let me ask her to be our artist in residence. She can just say no if she doesn't want to do it. And she said yes. And so coming up, the evening dedicated to George Harrison will be Patti Smith's 6th performance at Selby Gardens since 2022. And we look forward to cooking up more projects together going forward. And it's just been an incredible relationship. And at the same time, I think it underscores that botanical gardens, yes, they are about nature, science, plants, green space, but they can also be places where art is performed, art is created, and art is exhibited. And so I think that, we have built upon that with having Patti Smith as our artist in residence.
And we will put information about all of those exhibits on our website, WMNF.org. And in the last couple of minutes that we have, I'm going to ask you to describe some of the sustainability measures that you're taking at Selby. Tell us about that.
Sure. So in January 2024, Selby Gardens opened the first phase of our 3-phase master plan. And basically, we are now the world's first net positive energy botanical garden complex, meaning that we generate more energy than we consume. And that's due to more than 50,000 square feet of solar that allows us to be powered by the sun. And so the first phase feature that is now open features a new welcome center with a welcome gallery and welcome theater that also has an orientation video narrated by none other than Patti Smith. We also have a new plant research center where all of our preserved collections are safeguarded and where all of our research activities take place. And then we have what we're calling our Living Energy Access Facility, or the LEAF. Yes, it houses parking. It also has a 1-story garden-to-plate restaurant with an edible garden that fuels the produce served in the restaurant, a new gift shop, but then the kicker is that there's a more than 50,000 square foot solar array on the roof that is powering the whole project and makes us the first net positive energy botanical garden complex. So all of that is open, and we're now embarking on plans for phase 2, which will break ground at the end of this year and open by the end of 2027. The second phase involves a glass house complex for our living collections that is resilient and also powered with 100% renewable energy. So today, when you come to Selby Gardens, you can see less than 5% of our collections in our conservatory. This will bring out almost 100% of our living collections to the public. And then adjacent to that will be an indoor-outdoor learning pavilion for all of our education programs, as well as new garden features.
Well, I want to thank you both so much for coming on Tuesday Cafe, Jennifer and David.
Well, it's been a pleasure, and we'll look forward to seeing you and all your listeners in the gardens, I hope.
Yes, sounds great. Thanks so much. Jennifer Romanecki is the president and CEO of Marie Selby Botanical Gardens in Sarasota, and Dr. David Barry is their chief museum curator. And we turn now to our other musically related topic today.